I'm going to get us started. Thanks everyone for joining us for our second VVBGA winter webinar series. Today we're talking about high tunnel tomato yield, and we have some great farmers and UVM folks sharing today. So Christa from Jericho Settlers Farm, Phoenix is joining us from Brook Farm in Maine, Cheryl from UVM, and Vern wrapping it up with some benchmarking data from UVM.
All right. Yeah, so we are Jericho Settlers Farm up in Jericho, Vermont, right near Burlington, about 20 minutes outside of Burlington. And we have all kinds of tunnels that we do tomato production and other summer warm crop production in. So I'm going to focus primarily on some of the structural investments we've made to improve our tomato production and increase our tomato production. And not talk so much about the actual growing of the plants and such, because I think some of the other speakers are going to touch on that more. We have about 2 acres under cover, and not all of them go into tomatoes every summer, but about half of them. So just in general, I'm going to cover the things that we've thought about in terms of investing. So the soil, the water, the power, environmental controllers, soil heat, air heat, insect netting, ventilation, irrigation, which covers also fertigation and house insulation. So it's going to be pretty quick overview so that everyone will have time to talk, because you could probably do a talk on each one of those. We have a couple of these big, large Harnois structures. They're almost 200 feet long. They're 40 by 192s. And I guess the biggest thing I'll say about tunnel investments for tomato production is the biggest thing that's going to affect what level of investment you do is going to be what your markets are and what you're trying to grow for. So obviously, if you don't need that early market or aren't looking to get into that early market, doing these larger structures with heat and so forth may not be your avenue. But if you are, then we have found in general the larger structures and the longer you can go and the wider you can go, the more cost effective it is over time. Obviously a bigger upfront investment, but in terms of heating costs and everything over time, it pays off. But we have all different size tunnels that we use in different ways. So these big, large ones are used for our earliest season production. And there's a couple more that are just a little bit smaller than these two that are the 4 that we use to get going early. So the biggest thing, of course, making healthy plants is healthy soil, and in organic production, we test every year. All the houses we test every year with a saturated media test through the University of Maine soil testing lab, and we amend soils specifically for the crops that are going in case, whether it's tomatoes or cucumbers or peppers. And one of the things that we have found challenging over time is, well, of course, in all tunnel production, avoiding salt buildup. So we don't use any animal-based fertilizers or manures anymore or compost to try to reduce salt buildup. And we do still use peat moss. We have found it to be, for us, one of the most effective in terms of organic matter and pH management. We have found our pH creeps up over time, most likely due to our well, I don't know. That's the big question out there. Vern can talk about that, but we're assuming some of it has to do with our irrigation water, and so our soil type. And so anyway, investing in the soil is probably the best investment for healthy crop production. But if you are going to get into early season production, so the water and the power, plan these out first. Put them in before you put the house up if possible, and plan for expansion unless you absolutely know you're not going to grow your farm anymore beyond where you're at now, because chances are once you've put up a few tunnels, you're going to want more in terms of what they can do for you. And so whenever we put in a water line or a electrical line, we're always making sure to tap it out beyond the house somewhere, like to have an extension that we can tap into later if we need to, if we decide to keep going with other investments in the future. Don't don't like bury that line under the house and leave it there and not be able to get into the main line again. What else for that? And then of course, yeah, so if you're getting into early season production where you're going to be doing irrigation and ventilation in the colder times, you're going to need water power, obviously heating, you're going to need water and power. And it's, even if you're not doing the early season production, it just makes life a lot easier if you have it in your houses. If you can, even if you can't afford it right away, you could always, plan for putting the lines down, and you can always run the wires later. So environmental controllers, we have found to be key for us in our early production. It really takes a lot of the headache out of managing the ventilation, the heating, the irrigation. We don't do any CO2 amendment, but these controllers certainly can be programmed for that too, as well as lighting, which we don't do that either. But so there's a whole soup to nuts out there. We have primarily in our biggest houses that we're doing the earliest production, and we have iGrows. Those are nice in that we have a cloud link, so we can work from our phone to control temps and ventilation and things like that. We also have some advancing alternatives ones, which are about half the price of the iGrows. Both of those manufacturers have so many different models you can choose from. So advancing alternatives is a nice one if you want a little bit lower investment and you want to say automate roll-up sides and heat, but don't need everything on there. Last I knew, I think they have one model that is link that you can link to the cloud. I'm not positive about that. I haven't looked at them in a few years, but there's also Arisha out of Canada and Privo, which is like the top of the line, can do a million amazing things. Pretty big investment. But those are some of the controllers that are out there that people are using a lot of. I would say for us at a minimum, even if we can't afford to put controllers in all the houses, just getting automated roll-up sides on as many as possible has, just alleviated a lot of headache and labor for us, and just, a lot less worry. Even because, we have temp sensors in all the houses too, which we can check from our phones. So we know when houses are getting hot or cold and need to be managed, but then to have a controller that's managing it for you, so you don't have to run up there and roll down the side or roll up the side, is super nice. The roll-up side motors aren't too expensive. Knowles sells them. I think they're a couple $100 a piece. You can also find them now on Amazon or through Alibaba. But again, I haven't looked in the last year or so, but cheaper than what we found at Knowles. So for us, the key to the early production is the soil heat. Soil heat, good ventilation, healthy soil. Those, if you can, and obviously you'll need air heat too if the temps are getting really low, but soil heat is key for the root development of the plants and keeping those plants happy and healthy early on. They don't like going into cold soil. We're talking tomatoes and cucumbers even more so. So when we built these houses, we did have the structures up, but before we did any of the main infrastructure within the house or setting beds or anything like that, we put in soil heat. We have two different systems now. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that's a Maxim 250 boiler from Central Boiler. It's a biomass furnace, so we burn wood pellet in that. It can also take dry corn. It's a 250,000 BTU, and it does the ground heat for two of the large houses, so two of those 200-foot houses, and then we have air heat in both of those houses as well. And then the one down below is Takagi. It's a on-demand hot water heater, and that one's propane fueled. And that one's a smaller investment to start up. It's still a couple thousand for the unit, but versus 8,000 plus. I don't even know what Central Boiler. We bought that over 10 years ago, so it's probably quite a bit. Maybe Vern has that number off the top of his head, but but those biomass furnaces, they're more expensive, but they are a long-term investment in terms of renewable energy options if you're trying to get off of propane. And we use, so for the water line, I know there's a lot of discussion out there, should you use PEX or not use PEX, and the cost of PEX is really high. We used black 1.5 inch black water line, but it's rated for 160 degrees Fahrenheit, so it can take the high heat. You do want to make sure you have if you go this option, that you do have the higher heat rated pipe. We've had ours in the oldest house it's been in for 12 years now. We haven't had any issues with it. In terms of breakdown or letting too much air in or anything like that. So that's all I can tell you about it. I know in the long run, folks say, you know, PEX is best, but PEX is quite an investment in terms of cost. And then air heaters, we have Modines. Most of the ones we have are Affinity 93s. We have all different age groups in there now, but they're 93% efficient. And the biggest houses have two. They have one on either end of the house to help keep the air heat up and not get any cold spots at one end of the house or the other. And of course, the half fans to move the air through the house. So I spoke a little bit already about the roll-up side. So looking at ventilation in general, we have all different things going on, but all the houses that have controllers have roll-up sides on automation. All of our houses are built with the taller ground posts too. So even if you're doing passive ventilation, make sure if you can get the higher ground posts so you have more airflow capacity on the sides of your houses. These ridge vents were a game changer for us in our big houses early on. They are an investment. They're several grand a piece, and you can retrofit them to most houses. This house on the right is a Byler house out of Pennsylvania, and we have them on the Harnwaws also. They're all programmed with the controllers too. So just venting that humidity, so you have more effective heating and better humidity conditions for the plants is key. That Byler house you can see there also has a roll-up end wall. So we originally installed those, and I think they work in some situations. We ended up getting rid of them. I didn't like them. They were like just, I don't know. They're great for tractor access, but we found a different way to do tractor access, and I didn't like the mechanism for the roll-up. It was too arduous. We didn't actually, maybe if we had automated them somehow, we would have been happier with them, but we were still cranking them, and they were just, it made me want to cry. So I didn't, we can keep them. Let's see. Irrigation, fertigation. The slide on the right shows we did an overhead irrigation in our big houses with drop down lines. These are nice because we're growing winter greens in them, and just be able to have them all the headers drain out and everything. It's all gravity drained when we open everything up once we turn the water off. Also, we can just flip them up out of place. If the tractor is coming in and out, we just basically can flip them up, tie them up to a cross tie. In the spring and the fall, when we're flipping the houses, the tractors can come and go without running over any of the headers or anything, and they don't go away. Like the header doesn't get removed and thrown out of the house somewhere and off into the bushes and never found again. So it's nice to we like that system for the big houses. It works really well. And then we're just getting into timers on all our irrigation, programmable timers. We're using Toro Tempest, and it's cloud-based, so you can control it from your phone if you want. And we have a bigger hurdle before we can make that super effective, in that we have to increase our volume capacity and our pressure capacity to get all the houses to water them as well as we'd like to on the timing that we'd like to. That's a whole nother thing too, but it's something you have to think about. Do you have enough water? Do you have enough pressure to do the irrigation that you want to do? For the cucumber houses, we use insect netting. We wiggle wire them. We wiggle wire the netting to the hip board and to the top of the skirt. So our skirt from the baseboard up there, the skirt is actually wiggle wire track along the hoops, and the plastic for the skirt is attached to that, as well as the netting. And that way, if we have a house that we don't want the netting on for a given season, we can just take off the bottom. We just unwiggle it from the skirt, and we roll it up to the hip board and just hold it in place there for the season. And then if the next year we want it back, we just let it back down and fasten it up again. And lastly, perimeter insulation for these bigger houses. If you can do it, it's definitely worth it. Especially, if you're going to be heating these houses, anytime you're going to be heating especially ground heat, worth doing the cost of the insulation. Most of ours are just a couple feet down. I mean, it'd be great if you could do 4 feet down, but that might, depending on if you're building a new house, you might, be able to make it work during your process of building. That's a lot of retrofit if you're not, if you're retrofitting an older house, but definitely, we use a 2-inch blue board and 2 foot down at a minimum. And like I said, if it's feasible, 4 feet. And I will leave you with get the biggest house you can or houses, whatever your site can accommodate. We have found that we never regretted putting up too big a house. Like we never said, oh, this house is just too big. We've never said that. So whatever, it's cheaper to do it now than later. And yeah, if you're going to all the trouble to put up a house, put up as big a one as you can afford, manage, fit to your site. I know there's a lot of things to consider, and that's it.
Great. Thanks, Krista. That's a packed couple minutes with all the things. There is a question from Scott about what size insect netting you're using for excluding cucumber beetles.
Yeah, I think it's the 60 gram. We get it from Knowles. They have there's lots of different weights out there. There's various places to buy it, but we found Knowles to be price competitive on that. And yeah, we use the 60 gram weight. It is primarily just for cucumber beetles. We're not trying to exclude anything smaller than that.
Right. And we've definitely been chewing on the trade-offs of insect netting with airflow. And I think what Krista shared about her other ventilation and circulation factors help mitigate some of that. So
yeah, definitely having those peak vents in that situation is key. Or if you're doing gable vents, having some active airflow, to push the heat out of the top of the house. Worthwhile.
I don't see any other questions right now, but feel free to keep putting questions in the chat and we'll have some time for talking towards the end of this. I'm going to switch over to Phoenix now.
Hi there, I'm Phoenix O'Brien, Brook Farm, Thorndike, Maine. We grow about 20 acres of produce in the field, and we've got 3/4 of an acre of greenhouses. We sell to primarily supermarkets throughout Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Eastern Massachusetts. Yeah, tomatoes are one of our top selling products. I think last year we planted 5 30 by 96 tunnels tomatoes, cherries, and large fruited varieties. We sell about 20,000 pounds of slicer types, heirlooms, and I don't know, a lot of cherries. I can't remember exactly how many it was. But yeah, I guess I did not do as good a job preparing as Krista, but I was going to run you through how we grow tomatoes and kind of what our goals are. Some of the tools and equipment we use to make it easier. Again, I apologize for the lack of preparation, but yeah, any questions? I like questions just kind of as I go. But yeah, so we grow all indeterminate tomatoes. Our kind of goal with them is to plant them as early as we reasonably can with what our infrastructure will allow, and to keep them as long as we possibly can, looking at it as the initial investment on them being very expensive. We grow all hybrids, greenhouse varieties that are, $1 a seed or more, and grafting them. So our goal is to keep the plant as healthy as we can from, we like to start picking middle of June and ideally keep going with fairly consistent yields through middle to end of October, depending, and just kind of keep the plants cranking as best we can. We start them in January under lights, as is illustrated here in this picture, just to save on some propane. We do it in our seedling or our pack house. You can advance the slide. They're all grafted varieties. We've just used the Estamino, we tried some other ones and I didn't really notice a great difference. We've just in general have found the grafting really helps a lot as far as longevity, productivity, etc. This is our healing chamber setup right here. We just use a basic wire rack wire mesh rack with you can kind of see the humidifier at the top there. We just wrap a piece of greenhouse plastic around it and keep that humidifier on. And they really keeps the trays moist. You're not having to water them at all or worry about bottom watering them. They seem to really, we've done it a variety of ways, and this really is very cheap and very effective. Yeah, there's a lot of information on pruning out there. We just do it right in the trays, cut the head off the rootstock, and that way we're very minimal plant handling. We've had a lot of success doing it like this. So yeah, we shoot to plant sometime in, middle to end of March. You can advance the slide. Yeah, there's a little bit of a close up. Some of these stayed in a little long where they're got the roots coming through, but that's what we do. You can see too, we take off some foliage when we're grafting. We kind of just bring it down to the growth point, just so there's less the plant's respirating a little bit less if you remove all that. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next one. So yeah, that's a picture of our harvest cart. We've got some kind of sorry, it's not the best presentation, but yeah, we've got these harvest carts that we use we've got 5 or 6 of them. There's a place up in Quebec that sells them. They're very affordable. You can move them around between houses. They hold like 6 of these lugs. They're adjustable. You can push them down your tomato aisles. Yeah, that was again another shot of the cart, but also just demonstrating the yield and vigor from grafting. We see a lot of that, and so that's like what we're going for on the tomatoes, like as far as yield wise, cherries. Yeah, you can go ahead. You can bring the next slide. Yeah, oh, again. So yeah, we get them in the ground. We use you can see there, we just use the tomahawks. Again, these work carts are out of work platforms are from it's Maniculture is the dealer in Quebec. These are from Spain. They got a couple of different sizes. They're all-terrain. They are a little tippy, but you can't tip them over. Battery powered. We had been using ladders. This is way more effective, way more efficient. They're also just super handy to have, like for running irrigation lines, setting your tomahawks up, running your trellis wires, taking plants down, installing irrigation, working on the end walls, just working on the tunnels in general. You can see here we've got we lower and lean. You can see in the kind of bottom corner we have those vine supports down there, keep the fruit up off the ground. We source those from places in Ontario. I forget the name of it now. I'd have to look it up. But they're reasonably cheap, like a couple dollars a piece. They can make them any gauge you want, any height you want. Yeah, it's not Horde America's, it's the other. I'd have to look it up, but I could get back with people if they were interested in the contact. They were the cheapest I could find them. But yeah, so we'll lower and lean, 4 or 5 times a year, maybe more, dependent. The larger fruits, less. So to maintain crops throughout the year, we do a few different things. We do a soil test at the beginning of the season, and then we're implementing, moving forward, a monthly soil test and tissue sampling just to have an accurate picture of where we're at. All the houses are set up with, we've got fertilizer injectors. It's just a manual, you've got to mix it and do it. But yeah, we amend based on the soil tests, and we use UVM's tomato fertility recommendations. Basic stuff. We've got half fans, exhaust fans. We haven't installed it yet. We do have the Orisha system, so we're pretty excited to try that as far as managing temperatures a little bit better. I think it's pretty common practice for most larger commercial greenhouses, doing like a pre-day and a pre-night. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but in the morning before the sun hits your greenhouses, bringing the temperature of the greenhouse up to like roughly what the temperature is going to be that day to reduce condensation on the plants. And then likewise doing that going into the nighttime again to just reduce condensation. We're running Modine PDP heaters right now. We are going to be installing, we've got a blower type heater, and installing a plenum into the greenhouses. So we'll be running convection tubing under the crop supports and blowing hot air up into the crop canopy. Are there any more slides? Is that it?
I think that was it for your slides.
Okay, great. But yeah, this is kind of these plants we kind of over pruned, especially like these large slicers here. We were dealing with some disease pressure, but we've kind of since learned that more foliage is better, bigger leaves, especially when trying to sustain a fruit load throughout the season. The company that sells those carts, it's Maniculture is the name. Saw that question pop up. Yeah, they're in Quebec. If you Google it, it comes up. I could find the guy's contact too, but it comes right up. They're pretty easy to work with. They're surprisingly cheap. I don't know what you paid for yours, Becky. I think ours were like between $3,000 and $5,000, depending on the model.
Yeah, I think it was closer to 6, but I can't
Yeah.
remember. But that was just like 6 weeks to 2 months ago that we got it.
Yeah.
Um,
And so we went with those because of, I know some people use the Culiper like lower and lean thing from the ground, but for the number of tunnels we were doing, it was actually cheaper to buy this. And we figured this would probably be a little bit easier to sell if we decided it didn't work out.
I was curious, actually, are you like from a workflow perspective, do you have multiple carts or like how many, you said you have 5 tunnels in production?
Yeah, we have 2. Yeah, we had one, they sell 2 models, like a short one and a long one. We have one of each. So the long one, 2 people can work on, like, one person working on one row, one person working on the other row. Yeah, it seemed like one small one wasn't enough for the number of tunnels we have and like the time frame that we need to get in there and get out. Because we're kind of limited between picking and days that we have for crop maintenance. But yeah, definitely makes working on the tall tomatoes a lot easier as far as like pruning, clipping, because our trellis line is like at between 10 and 12 feet depending on the tunnel.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, and definitely that was a great presentation. Always
Okay, good.
appreciative
Thank you.
of the information, and if people have more questions for Phoenix, I don't know if you're going to stay on for the rest of this, but you can keep putting them in the chat and we have time. I'm just gonna before Cheryl switches gears a little bit into some alyssum habitat plants, I'm going to just show you, Andy Jones was going to share his little harvest cart that he had fabricated, and he can't be here, but he generously sent some slides. This is something that they had custom fabricated for the Intervale a couple years ago, and it's been a game changer. They can load a lot of tomatoes on the cart. In the cart, you can see there's a couple, they have these like runners for the cart that go in between each bed, and they can just lift the cart and move it between beds. So that's fittings on there. I think Allie's on here. If people have questions, Allie could probably answer them specifically about the cart and the use of it. But I just wanted to share those before we switch over to Cheryl. So all of you, Cheryl, thank you so much for jumping on.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everybody. I really appreciate being able to be here today to chat real quick about some of our year one results from one of our high tunnel projects. A few years ago, we got to thinking about what the pest management benefits of planting some flowering plants in the unused space between tunnels. And we chose alyssum because it's really attractive to beneficials, it's easy to grow, it's fairly hardy, and it's what we've been testing as habitat plants for several years now within high tunnels to attract and sustain natural enemies. So this past summer, we established these strips at 3 locations in Vermont, and here's a few pictures of the startup process. And we tested direct seeding the alyssum versus using transplants into weed barriers in late May. And we flip-flopped these 1 meter sections that had 18 bunches of alyssum per section. And by bunch, I mean like a pinch of seeds per unit, say like maybe 5 or 10, just because the seeds are so tiny. And here's what they look like at each site in their peak in July. And they were just amazingly beautiful. They were really fragrant and they were super attractive to bugs of all kinds. And these actually lasted really late into October and even longer because we had such a warm fall. And I just want to say thanks so much to the farms that supported this work and helped take such great care of the strips and getting them established, as well as letting me scout their tunnels all summer long, and also to the NRCS for funding this project. I really appreciate it that we are able to do this sort of research. And they were just so beautiful. So what do we find? Well, we sampled every 3 weeks until late September. And what we did was we selected 9 1 meter square sections per alyssum strip, and we visually inspected these sections for about 30 seconds. And then we tapped out the 3 sections within each onto this laminated white piece of paper. And we found over 3,200 arthropods visiting the plantings. So the most common orders that we found visiting them were flies, bugs, beetles, bees and wasps, and some others. And of that total number of visitors, 29% of them were actually natural enemies that provide pest management that we were personally most interested in observing. I'm sure there were more, but it's kind of hard to classify things sometimes on the fly. And these natural enemies were really comprised of syrphid fly adults, aureus adults and nymphs, small parasitic wasps, and a lot of others like various tachinid flies, lady beetles, lacewings, rope beetles, assassin bugs, predatory thrips, spiders, so on and so forth. So the top pests that we actually found on the alyssum were actually flea beetles and tarnished plant bugs. And to a lesser extent, sometimes we saw thrips. And although we noticed quite an abundance of tarnished plant bugs and flea beetles, we never saw them causing any damage to any of the tunnel crops that were adjacent to the strips. So all the tunnels that we evaluated as part of this project contained tomatoes, with the exception of one, which was had peppers. And within the tunnels, we inspected 15 plants within 3 beds. And these beds were the outer edge beds, and we chose one in the middle. And we looked for numerous pests that are common in high tunnels. And the overwhelming majority of what we observed were aphids and white flies. So no surprise there, because those are really common on tomatoes. So it was mostly potato aphid and greenhouse whitefly. So remember that the greenhouse whitefly, they have those really long hairs on their nymphs or their immature stages, and their adults tend to hold their wings kind of flat on their backs. And those potato aphids, they tend to infest growth tips. So the infestations tend to happen kind of higher up, and they're often pink in color, and they have these really long legs and antenna. So there were several natural enemies of interest that we also saw on the crops, and many of them were released prophylactically, and they did not originate from the wild. For example, in some tunnels, the parasitic wasp Incarcia formosa was released to attack the greenhouse whitefly, and Aphidius urbi, which is also a parasitic wasp, and Aphidoletes, which is a fly with predatory maggots, they were released for the aphids. So others that we found were things like syrphid flies that came in from the outside. And parasitized whitefly nymphs really comprise the majority of what we were seeing, followed by these aphid parasitic wasps and their mummies. So there are lots of predatory maggots also, and these were either from syrphid flies or the Aphidoletes. And we saw some other things too, like lacewings, lady beetles, and some predatory bugs. So here's just some more pictures of what we saw. So a lot of these were purchased, yes, but lots of these were not. For example, parasitic wasps that are called preyons. That's the picture in the lower left corner. It's an aphid parasite, and its mummies make the aphid look like it's raised up on a little pedestal. And we also saw a lot of wild green lacewings and lots of predatory maggots, which I said earlier. And those were from various species of hoverflies. For example, we saw things like the margin calligrapher and the common flower fly. And those are two species that have predatory maggots, but we also saw other syrphid species like the drone fly, which isn't pictured here, but that's actually not a syrphid fly that has predatory maggots. They feed on dead and decaying matter. So we saw lots of tachinids, and we also saw a really cool one called the swift feather-legged fly. And that's kind of in the middle on the left. And this one is actually, it's a parasitoid, and its larvae are parasitoids of squash and stink bugs. And we also saw a lot of aureus, and that's the predatory bug. So a few questions that we're trying to answer in this project are, one, do habitat plantings outside tunnels increase natural enemy abundance within the tunnels? And two, are there any differences in natural enemy numbers on tunnel crops at 3 different bed distances away from the habitat planting? Now, in a perfect world, all tunnels would be free of pests, and we would hopefully be able to see these really awesome crystal clear differences, but that's rarely the case, and that certainly did not happen here. But what we did observe in the tunnels, that the tunnels that were next to the alyssum had significantly more natural enemies than the control tunnels without the alyssum, and that's a figure on the left. The problem is this is kind of expected, just because, as luck would have it, some of the pests that occurred happened to just occur in those tunnels that were conveniently next to the alyssum habitat strips, and not so much in the control tunnels without the alyssum plantings. So because of this, a lot of releases of commercial biocontrols occurred, which is reflected in the abundances here. So to be clear, I just want to be clear here, like I repeat this, like there weren't pests on the tunnel crops because of the alyssum strips. Those were there beforehand. So it's not because the alyssum was there that there were aphids or whiteflies that occurred there. Just want to clarify that. But I will say that all these tunnels that had these, they were very successfully managed with biocontrol releases. And those were made through, because there was routine scouting going on and they're being released prophylactically. So by routine scouting, kind of knowing when things were gonna, kind of seeing these trends over time, we were able to like correct that eventually over time. So that was really cool. So what we did see, in addition, we did see some significant differences in natural enemies on plants and beds at the different distances from the alyssum, but was really generally very site and natural enemy type dependent. And that's because each location was different with what was going on in the tunnels. And we did observe one really interesting trend in one tunnel that was next to the alyssum that had some potato aphids. So at first, the beds that were next to the alyssum had more aphids than on the other beds in the tunnel. However, over time, we observed that the bed that was next to the alyssum ended up having significantly decreased numbers than the beds that were further away, and had much less damage compared to those beds as well. And that's kind of what's reflected in the figure on the right. And it was kind of hard to disentangle the natural enemy information because they tend to just kind of follow the trend of where the aphids are. So where the aphids are abundant, you're going to have more natural enemies. That's kind of the way it is. We'd expect that. So given these results, it really does appear that alyssum was contributing something to some extent to the biocontrol of the aphids in the beds that were adjacent to the strip, especially early in the season. So that was kind of really exciting to kind of see something like this unfold. And we're going to be repeating this again next year, so we can have, you know, a lot more data to work with to be able to see their contribution to pest management in tunnels. So here is just a quick link to the project webpage, and I'll be updating this as we delve deeper into analyzing the results, and we look forward to year 2, because we're going to look at, you know, this again, and also we want to look at things like how alyssum is going to see if it's going to reseed itself. We're going to see if it comes back. That'll be really interesting to see. And also I wanted to take a quick second to mention that there's a new biocontrol agent in town. It's called the Nestus, or the crazy mite. And they call them crazy mites or whirligig mites because they have this erratic searching behavior. Now, this has been on the Canadian market since 2022, and it can now be used in the United States in some select states. Vermont is one of them. It's a generalist, meaning it attacks a whole lot of different pests, and it can even eat itself. So these mites don't discriminate between good pests and, you know, good bugs versus the bad bugs. So you have to use it with caution. It's kind of like a one and done sort of thing, but there have been some impressive reports of them eradicating foxglove aphids, and research using this mite is really ongoing. So I'm really excited to see this for myself, to see how this mite performs in high tunnels. So if anyone's game to try it, I suggest talking with their biocontrol suppliers to see if this is something that might be right for you. And we here at the entomology lab had kind of a hand in making sure that this came to Vermont by helping with the permitting process. And several years ago, we submitted some specimens just to confirm its presence here in Vermont for it to be able to be used here in the States. So finally, I just wanted to mention that we have been circulating a high tunnel survey regionally. It's a follow-up one to one that we were circulating years ago. So please help us by filling that out so we know what your needs are, how we can help you, what your problems are. It would be great to see some changes over time. So please fill that out if you can, and spread the word. And we also have several listservs that if you want to join them, feel free to send me an email. We have our green growers for greenhouse ornamentals, but we have our tunnel vision one where you can get our high tunnel newsletter that Becky and I and others put out. And we also have one for ticks. And that's it. Are there any questions? Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's cool to learn about a new biocontrol agent in town.
It is. It's really cool. It's exciting.
Yeah, if you know suppliers who carry that, maybe you could put that in the chat, or if you'd rather just have people talk to you.
Yeah, they can. No, I'll say it's the mite is actually commercially produced by Applied Bionomics in Canada. So anybody who is a distributor of Applied Bionomics products, they would be the ones that you can get that from, like such as IPM Labs, Sound Horticulture, Evergreen Growers, and there's several others. I think Arbica Organics might carry them as well. So there's a lot of different hubs that will carry them.
Do you know if they go after things like broad mites and crown mites?
They have a very broad host range, and research is ongoing. So I'm not sure if they looked at that specifically yet.
Cool. Well, we will have to have some follow-ups on crazy mite.
Yes, we will.
Vern, are you still up for sharing a few benchmarking slides? Gonna wrap up with Vern. A lot of you participated in this research last couple of years, and these are just some quick summary slides. I'm gonna hand it over to you, Vern. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Becky. Yep, so we continue to process the data that folks provided from our pretty extensive survey about how folks are growing tunnel tomatoes, and you can see the attributes that kind of qualified a person to participate. We're trying to hold some things consistent, since there's already so much variability across tunnels and farms and practices. So this is the way, it's a very common set of production practices. But after that, things diverge a lot. You can see where we got results from 48 farms spread across the region, mostly Vermont, but not exclusively. And it was interesting that the vast majority of tunnels were the same size, roughly the 30 by 96, and that yields were pretty consistent, averaging 2.2 pounds. But slide's a little blocked out on the right on my screen, but there are a number of farms that are getting well above the average, and then some well below. The outliers, like really low, people made comments about how tomatoes really weren't their thing, wasn't that important to their market, or was just a small part of what they were paying attention to in tunnel. And the very highest yielders are really dialed in tomatoes, systems like Christa described earlier. So really the question we're trying to get at is which practices make sense to adopt to improve yields, given all the investment you already have in there. And it was kind of fascinating that there is no correlation between a single practice and yield. It's really comes down to there's a package of things that can increase yield, and also it's kind of the staves of the barrel principle. Doesn't matter how good your soil management is with nutrients, irrigation, drainage, if you're not managing ventilation, circulation also. So what I kind of excuse me, defaulted to is comparing the top 10 yielders to all others. So the top 10 tunnels are getting essentially twice the yield of others, and looking at what's different and what isn't, and trying to draw some conclusions. We still have a ways to go. Haven't processed the water data. We sent free water tests to people, so getting at the pH and alkalinity and things like that. But you can see if you start at the bottom, number of days that a transplant is in a tunnel does not seem to be a huge factor. There's not a big difference between the high yielders and the low yielders. And I would have thought ventilation area would have more of an effect, but again, not a big difference. Do keep in mind, this is self-reported data, so take it with a grain of pollen. The area that each leader has to grow in, not hugely different. Starting to get into some differences when you look at how much area is a single drip line trying to irrigate. There's 44% more area that's got to be irrigated in these lower yielders. So more drip lines. This is not news. Becky revealed that in an earlier collection of data that we got. So here's where my brain starts churning of which things can you put together. The grafting obviously can make a big difference if your soils are not performing optimally. You've got compaction or low fertility or whatever the diseases that grafting might overcome. Starting earlier obviously is benefited by air heat. The long-term soil tunnel test is kind of a no-brainer to feed your plants what they need to grow optimally. And just to be clear, that's because it's both the reserve, the regular modified Morgan's field test, and the short-term desaturated media. The two together are really important. But one thing, you know, Becky and I have talked about a lot is we suspect there's some combination of circulation and ventilation that is really important here. And when I did a little digging in the research, one thing that jumped out at me was the proper use of HAF fans to mix not just humidity, temperature, but also carbon dioxide. Because when it's sunny out there and the plants are cranking, there's a CO2 deficit around the leaves unless the air is moving. So that seems important. And then the automated roll-up sides are really sort of jumping out. There's a big difference in adoption between the high yielders and others. And then of course it goes beyond just the yield. The labor implications are also significant. But if you think it through, to accommodate the temperature fluctuations, those things really need to be going up and down all the time, right? It gets cloudy, it's sunny, it's not. And yet most people, many farms, it's a one and done thing. You open them, then you close them. So this improved management of circulation and ventilation through automating the roll-up sides and having the proper kind of HAF fan, there's clear calculation of how much air needs to be moved. It's all on Chris Callahan's Ag Engineering site. He's got a great blog post about circulation and ventilation. Those are jumping out in part because we're looking at this with an eye to cost. These are not hugely expensive improvements that can be made. And so fortunately, Becky just got a pre-approval on a applied research grant. So we're hoping to do is get that grant, right? And be able to compare tunnels with and without the HAF and automated roll-up sides, and get some hard data on the impacts of yield on that. So there's just a few minutes left. I think I'll stop and open it up to questions, not just about this, but anything that folks have seen or heard so far today. One last thing, I'll just say, if you want to see the complete slide set so far, I did give it at the New England Veg and Fruit Conference. It's in the tomato session. And if you haven't gone and checked out those proceedings of all the slideshows from all the sessions, yeah, you really ought to do it. It's a remarkable collection of information.
I'll put that link in the chat and also to Chris's calculator here. Thanks, Vern. Question about shade cloth. Yeah.
Shade cloth is a good one. You know, and I've been getting a bunch of emails about this. Last year's heat obviously is motivating the thinking and ongoing heat. There's not nearly as much definitive research as you would think. 30% does seem to be the number, the maximum, if you're going to use it. And obviously having it on too long can reduce yields by limiting sunlight. Putting it on and off doesn't seem super attractive, but that's what it feels like. The short answer is, to me, when it's really hot, get it on there. Don't leave it on for longer than you feel is necessary, to try and avoid blossom drop and yellow shoulder and things like that. But it's another area that's ripe for research. And if you're looking for some of the research, it's Purdue has done, put 2 good newsletter articles out about use of shade cloth.
Yeah, there's also some good recent research from the University of Delaware, I think, with Jerry Wurst.
And the question about the soil pH is also a good one. So one take-home message here is it's a hugely buffered system. So when you look at acidification data for irrigation water to accommodate or address rising pH, most of it's about growing in containers of some size, all the way from plugs up to, there's nothing I can find that's bigger than a 4-inch pot that's been researched. So it's a big question mark of if that thinking applies to a whole greenhouse full of soil. I mean, obviously it's not a great idea to let things keep going up, but we also found people have been adding sulfur year in and year out, and it's not really moving the pH needle down. So that's a question. The win-win of the peat makes sense. It does seem to move things a little, and you are maintaining the organic matter. So yeah, there's more work to be done here before people spend a lot of money on acidification. I don't know, Becky, you've been using citric acid in your tunnels. I don't know if you have anything to add on your experience. Oh, and just one other thing I'll add too, the salts. You know, people confuse sometimes the salt levels, and it's moving up. That top layer can be super salty, and a little further down, not so much. So when you take one sample that mixes it all together, you're not getting a great picture. So mixing is one important attribute. And obviously taking the cover off at some point can be helpful, but I think my thinking is these days is it requires more complicated soil testing. You should probably test at different levels of depth. Sorry, Becky.
I was just going to say, with the citric acid, I don't actually have any like hard information on it. It makes us feel like we're doing something about it because our pH is really high in the soil, and we've been adding sulfur. I mean, this is common with a lot of people. And it just seems like adding citric acid at least will keep things from getting worse if we're kind of buffering the water back down to a more reasonable alkalinity. But I'm excited to dig into the data and try to figure out if there's like more efficient and kind of more sustainable ways to manage that, and whether that means just drawing water from a pond or collected rainwater might be the smartest way to go.
And Christa, has your pH gone down with the ongoing years of peat additions, or anyone else that's been adding peat or acidifying? Love to hear your thoughts.
It seems to be keeping it in check anyway. It hasn't gone down a lot, but it's not going up as much as it did. Like there was a few years where it was like going, and now it's kind of holding a little bit. But yeah, I don't know if it's because of the peat, but we've been doing some sulfur too, and yeah, it doesn't seem like, sometimes I'll still find those sulfur particles. It doesn't seem like they break down very quickly.
Well, thank you so much to Christa and Phoenix, Cheryl and Vern emerging today, last minutes to share all about a little bit in this very big topic.
This week will be the exciting topic of NEP disaster coverage. And then we have Julie Jacks joining from Farm Service Agency in Vermont. She's really great. She's trying hard to make the program work. And it is a free disaster coverage for certain groups of underserved individuals. So the deadline for buying up is March 15th. So if you're interested in that program, please join us. I piped in because I'll be leading it with Julie, and Becky will be skiing.
Yeah, I'll be freezing, I think, but yes, this is next week's program down here at the end. And then I think the week after that is Allie and Pests, which will be really great. We've got, if you guys don't know, Christy Hopting from Cornell joining us to share her expertise along with our favorite Anne Hazel Riggs. So that's that. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great afternoon.